Autopoesis means the writing of the I, the self. The self is not the ego. The self is the first person singular I, which means something important. It's basically a steersman. So in order to be in your optimal position, you channel from outside, you channel your divine inspiration, what the Greeks call the demon or the daemon, and you find a counterbalance between what's being channeled to you and your own self-choice. So of course, it always comes back, the Greeks always did everything the best. So if you ever want to reference anything, just go back to the Greeks. That's the positive demon, not the negative demons. But also, and I don't know where I'm going to go in this like channeling, so this is what I'm being inspired to talk about for 1 minute, which is part of my spiritual work, which is basically that in the old world of humans, for thousands of years, leading up to the time of Christ, the right brain, left hand was dominant. That is, that humans were nothing but channeling their elders, the lower gods that were assigned to them on earth, and they needed to like shepherd them like children or animals. But then by the time that Christ came around, those elder gods on earth were holding humans back, kind of like parents who don't want to let their kids grow up. So Christ came in and said, okay, come on, like, humans are supposed to evolve to be co-creators, artists with God, so let's not hold them back anymore. And the reason I'm talking about that is because Philip Dick, the incredible writer, poet, who was a poor man who was writing hack work, 50 novels to barely survive, channeled some of the most incredible spiritual material ever known to man. He has a similar idea. And when I read his work 40 years ago, Valis, I felt was transformed by it. And it's still, to this day, one of the most highly spiritual, influential works. So the idea is that then, after the Greeks and Christ, the left brain, right hand of self and reason came on board, where humans were like, I have free will and free choice. I do what I want. I don't need the gods anymore to tell me what to do. And that's happened for the past 2,000 years. But then in recent years, that went too far. We became trapped. So now we're at a turning point. We're at a turning point where we're reverting back to the old ways. Reverting back to the old ways. That's the basis of all the New Age hippie stuff, and it's the basis of like neo-tribalism and binarism. Let's all like join our own cult and like fight each other. That's not good. That's not good. So what Dick realized, and I agree with, and this sounds crazy because it has nothing to do with what I'm here to do today, but this is what's coming out, so you got to deal with it. It'll find its place. Is that it's called the syzygy. That is, that the left brain and right brain come together. The old times when we used to channel the divine links with our own self-creative ego of free will and choice. So I'm saying that backwards and reverse, understanding decades later what I was doing with this when I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, I quit my PhD and threw my scholarships in the garbage and didn't have a job or an affiliation for years and years, and all I did was write this work, which is still the most important thing in my life, to be honest. And this work, like the book, Autopoesis, which became an idea and a concept and a method that I used in my clinical practice as a doctor and a psychoanalyst as well. So this is what I'm most proud of. We're going to talk about the paintings too at some point and what that means and how that's related to it. But I wanted to give you the context that like when I was a teenager, I read Freud and Nietzsche. Who reads Freud and Nietzsche when they're a teenager, especially in the suburbs? I don't even know how it got to me. I had a couple of cool teachers who like put it in my hands, and then I decided this is what I want to do. I want to be a philosopher and a psychoanalyst and change the world, save the world, heal the world. So I tried to do that. I moved to Europe and was training and doing my doctorate and so forth, and then I reached a kind of a wall because I felt like I was so excited to discover ideas. All this, it was like a candy store. It's like Christmas. And then I got so disappointed that all these professors and doctors didn't seem to give a shit about it. And they wanted to like clamp it all down and confine it all. And like, you need to do your doctoral thesis about some arcane, irrelevant, detailed topic somewhere. And I said, no, I want to do a grand synthesis of all the knowledge and ideas that have ever been in world history, which they didn't like. Although the first topic of my thesis was called Technology and Nihilism. I started writing my doctorate because Nietzsche and Heidegger influenced me to the idea that whereas there were certain people throughout history that might have had a crisis and had to leave society to go into hiding in a monastery, like Lao Tzu, the Taoist, or Gautama Buddha, who was an elevated priest who said, fuck the priesthood, all life is suffering, I'm going to figure this out. Or Jesus, who said, whatever, fuck my culture, I'm also going to the desert. I felt at this time, maybe it was my own crisis, my own personal crisis in my early 20s, that this was also a human crisis, that all humans, this is what I learned from Nietzsche and Freud, Nietzsche's confrontation with nihilism and Freud's confrontation with alienation in Civilization and Its Discontents, was that all humanity was about to be faced with the crisis that only a few people were faced with in the past and were able to go to monasteries to solve. So what does that mean? Well, sociologically, I mean scientifically, what I was trying to put forward in my research was that technology itself, communication, transportation, etc., was forcing this crisis upon the whole of humanity. In other words, if you grow up in an isolated community for centuries where everyone believes the same thing, you're solidified in this belief system. Now you're trapped, you're stuck, you're limited, but you're safe. But if suddenly the whole world, all of culture, realizes that there's other humans who believe something completely different, therefore there's no truth, no absolute truth that's guaranteed. Nietzsche said, God is dead, we killed him, and this is a difficult situation. Or Freud said, we're alienated, and the richest, smartest cultures are nihilistically the most suicidal. We have to solve this problem. It's a big problem to solve. I set the problem to solve for the world. Maybe it was myself that I had to deal with, that had to do with my own childhood and my own family issues. So psychoanalysis probably was the right thing to figure out but it was the relationship between my personal issues and crisis and the larger global crisis. I didn't make it just about me, and I've never made it about my patients. In other words, for every patient, it's a global problem, and they're each doing God's work by trying to solve the problem of their own lineage. Anyone who undertakes a real therapeutic transformation is doing something divine. They're taking the whole lineage of trauma, and they're solving it so it doesn't get passed on. So that was the sort of foundation of the work, was the desire to philosophically understand all ideas about what it meant to exist. The spiritual idea of crisis, is there something beyond the material world? The psychological problem of self-consciousness, that you suddenly become aware of who programmed you and how that's fucked you up. And the artistic, literary desire to express something different. These were all like threads that were coming into me at one time, from anywhere, from everywhere. I mean, I said that I read Freud and Nietzsche when I was a teenager, but when I was 21 and I was still only doing scientific philosophical work, I met a French woman who put Bataille and Guattari in my hands, and she was a nihilist, and that was like kind of like scary to me. And I tried to convince her that the world was worth living for, and she contaminated me with her French nihilism. But it was a beautiful contamination that I had to deal with for a while. It was personal. Everything was always personal. All these experiences, there was never something that wasn't personal or theoretical. Theoretical comes out of the personal. Even though my first love was always for the clinical, scientific, and my second love was towards the artistic, literary, it was always a conjoined effort. Make sure you tell me when 10 minutes has elapsed, so I can keep on track. What? get to the reading soon. I'm going to get to the reading soon. It's okay. I'll clean it up here. So I completed my doctoral requirements. I started writing my thesis, and I didn't like what was coming out. It seemed false to me. The false academic expository style that I had learned and mastered to get A's and scholarships. And I thought, this is bullshit, because I'm reading Parmenides and Lao Tzu and Nietzsche and Heidegger, and it's different. So I was I wanted to enter into writing like that, and I did that. And of course, I tried to do the ridiculous thing of getting them to accept that as my doctoral thesis, which they wouldn't. So I left, and I left for a long time, but I just did spiritual practice and writing and etc. And writing as art. I never understood plastic art. You realize that when I was 24, I realized there was such a thing as art school? I'm like, how come nobody ever told me there was art school? And then I thought about going to art school. I'm like, scrap all this shit, I'm just gonna be an artist. But then I didn't. I thought, I love Duchamp and Beuys, but I want to apply that to everyday life, meaning I want to deconstruct. I want to do what Duchamp did in the world of medicine and university, etc. And link it together so it's not in an artistic ghetto, and try to find a way to integrate and connect different layers. So that was part of the inspiration. But I did spend 6 to 8 years wandering, in a sense, without a job or affiliation. And then when I was 30 and I completed this work, which was being written on napkins in restaurants and cafes and notebooks, spontaneously, free associatively, the free associative spirit of Freud and Reich, which influenced the Beats, Kerouac, Ginsberg, Burroughs, who I love, was what I was doing. And then after it was written and there was this pile of shit, I went back and I became the editor, who was a second different person, and said, okay, I moved from being my own analysan to being my own analyst, and said, okay, now how are we going to assemble and make sense of your story, your truth? And so I did that, and I finished it, and that was over 30 years ago. And yeah, then I let it sit there. I sometimes gave it to friends, but for some reason I wasn't ready to publish it, and I had to go back, and so I went back. I was 30, and I thought, I can't believe I survived. I was willing to die, literally, to be true to myself. Live free or die. And because I succeeded, I decided, well, you could die now if you want, but why not go back to the world? Try again. So I did, and so all my 30s was really painful, grueling bullshit to like do my doctorate, do another doctorate in medicine, try to set up my own clinic, try to find a way to survive. And I have to say, I lived on nothing for literally decades before I started becoming successful accidentally. And so it was always an after effect, which I am grateful for. And I believe that I tell this to patients when they come to this crisis about, like, they always do this wrong thing of like, okay, well, I'll just do this thing. I'll just do the safe thing and make money for a while, and then I'll go back and do my desire. And I tell them, that doesn't work. Stick with your desire as long as it takes, and it will eventually repay you. Don't try to make the trade with the devil the other way. It doesn't work. So, I believe in that. Okay. So, I was writing on one of the first Mac computers back then, and they did have a program called HyperCard, which was this idea of like note cards that you would write on. And I conceived this, and I thought, why are books linear? Every page should be a frame. Every page, no matter how long it is, no matter what format it is, should be separate world, and then could connect to every other page. And that was before the internet, and I was looking at chaos theory and complexity theory, which related to that. And eventually the internet and then social media caught up with these ideas. But in the meantime, and the internet was exciting. When the internet first started in '95, I wrote my own HTML code and did publish these books in the early internet. I also published them in small editions for people. but then I just left it all behind because I was busy with other stuff. And then like, I always meant to go back and put this stuff out, and for some reason over this year, I was gonna print the books. But then I realized with all the AI stuff going on in social media, which I've never participated in because it's disgusting and destroys human lives and souls, that's okay. I'm gonna figure out how to redeem it. I have to redeem it. I have to go into the matrix in order to redeem it, I realize, so it's okay. But I suddenly realized, yeah, well, this is how it should be done. So it was suggested to me by some others around me that this is how it should be done, and I'm so excited. It's such a gift that we were able to program these machines how I envisioned them decades ago, before the technology was available. So the 4 books are separated here in the monitors. Each book has its own digital proprietary program that will allow it to not only be read linearly, but holographically, where you press a button, like the I Ching, it'll go to a hexagram, that'll be your page, an oracle. Oracles are huge now on the internet, tarot, whatever. And so I'm going to read it that way. I'm going to sample each book separately. Then I'm going to come back and sample the totality, because I have a composite version of the 4 books here, so that'll navigate between the 4 books. But there was an unfolding when I edited it. In other words, I started as a fairly philosophical person, very existential. So the first book is very much influenced by Taoism and Zen. And the second book becomes more desperate because that's when I started to go through my crisis of leaving my doctorate and having some emotional relationships that were breaking down. And so that one becomes more influenced by Christian mysticism, the Western tradition, the dark night of the soul, the attempt to evolve unconditional love out of the pain of desire. And so I keep descending. The whole series is like a Dante's Inferno. Not the Inferno, what's the whole thing called? The Divine Comedy. Part of it's the Inferno, part of it's hell. I descended into hell, and then I came back out of it. The book 3 reaches the pinnacle, which is a paradox, the pinnacle of hell, which is essentially, book 3 is where I became humanized, having to fall from my so-called angelic nature. By the way, if anyone's ever seen Wings of Desire, or Himmel über Berlin, it was my favorite movie. That came out right when I was writing, so I'm like, yes, that resonates. I fell to earth, okay? I fell to earth. I fell in love with a woman. It was extremely painful. The hatred of love is still what I think is the most important, book 3. I freely accept challenges on this. I think I pretty much wrote everything that could ever be written about desire and attraction and repulsion and love and hate in that book. And then I came back out of it, and then the 4th book is kind of like a meta book. It's kind of like an attempt to conceptually, theoretically make sense of the whole work through Lacan and other people. And that's why I thought I could assemble it and hand it in as my PhD thesis, which I did. And they said, no, that's not good. You can't do that. So then I had to start over again and write an actual book of more ideas, which I did, which will be published soon. All right, so by the way, the 4 books are published as separate literary books, like normal Kindles, where you read it as a literary book. But fortunately, we were able to break the Kindle problem and make it so that, because you can't like read it directly, like as a mass of words and garbage. So each page still retains its own frame in the Kindle, but it could only be done linearly because they don't have the navigation function. But in the Apple Books version, you can use the navigation that I'm using. And so that's a whole, all 4 books together with navigation. So yeah, it'll tell you at the top, there's no page numbers because that's the whole idea. The page number is abstract. The same thing that Dziga Vertov said in the early days of cinema, which is, what's wrong with cinema? Why are we filming theater, which is thousands of years old, and not using cinema for what it is? Why are we not running around in the streets doing abstract shit. It's the same with books. I'm like, why are we using page numbers? And why not do something different? Why not experiment with what a book could be? Which I'll go back to, this is like a reference to the future. The paintings are related to the greatest American philosopher and mathematician, Charles Peirce's diagrams. And part of Peirce's logic is that each page is a universe, and whatever is described on that universe is the truth. And within that truth, there's methods. So he redefined propositional and prepositional logic so that words and the way they're related they have a logical meaning. And so I used that later on. I became very influenced by Peirce. So that's something that's still very similar to what I was doing back here. But anyway, so it says Autopoesis Volume 1, which is called The Present, yeah. I start with pure being. I start with the end. I start with where we're supposed to get to when we've become purely enlightened. And then I descended backwards for some weird reason. But the present, of course, also means the present, the gift. I wanted to give a gift to the world. The present, chapter 2, Dark Night of the Soul. I guess I was already going into that at the end of this book. Section 20. To love death more than all, or not to care, not mattering death. 100 deaths you have lived in other lives. Suicide does not exist. Death is, and now you are. Section 59, I will not write, I will live. It's giving me short ones. Section 19, when I write, it does not really matter whether I use I, we, you, one, to keep this in mind. Section 15, tears, 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 tears. Tragedy, my only escape, the world's only salvation. Affirm the evil and ill, resign yourself. Don't erase a thing. They each reach a different planet, solely their own. They are alone on their planets. Together, each planet in a common universe, a common experience. The experience of God, inside, outside, the witness of God becomes him. His becoming is human, a transmigration misunderstood, not understood in the disappearing question of God or man. The authentic human has reached his limits, whatever they are. The limits of existence which are the same for everyone, different for God. He has found God everywhere, so in himself. He has found God in himself, so everywhere. Section 30 states that the shock of relativism, the angst of meaninglessness, the illusory salvation of radical freedom, the ignorance of standing outside, the impossibility of regaining innocence, the mediation of agnosticism and faith, doubt and belief, outside and inside, knowing and feeling, the tragedy of joy and sorrow dissolving, the ecstasy of the flux, the indifference to all positions, the belief in nothing and everything, the difficulty of living after the fact, the impossibility of communicating a solution. All right, well, volume 1, right now you're boring me. So, we'll go to volume 2, which someone had turned to, volume 2 is called A Little Book of Faith. It's a reference to the medieval text of St. John of the Cross and other Christian mystics. The Western mystical tradition is the opposite of the Eastern tradition. In my cosmology, my spirituality, they're fused. That is, that we have to simultaneously experience the Eastern consciousness of void and neutrality, and at the same time, the Western tradition of unconditional love. I believe they have to be fused, just like the left and right brain. The Little Book of Faith, Book 2, Chapter 1, The Journal of a Forgotten Man. The Summit, Section 10, looking at my words on the page as they happen, falling in love with them. Finally, drowning in them. They're consuming me. They are me. I love you. I'm dying and not dying. I capture my states, loving me in the page. Section titled An Open Letter, Part 3. What crown do you want for being one of the few, perhaps increasingly many, who knows that every thought, belief, religion, idea, or law is a lie, a delusion to avoid the ultimate tragedy of death? If you know this and continue to play the game, the impoverished game devoid of life, you are worse than the most ignorant believer and a coward. I entreat you to summon the courage that only the most ignorant believer I entreat you to summon the courage that only desire can foster in you, to lie majestically, to speak with silence, to sacrifice yourself and others. I ask you to think of St. Teresa and St. John in their supreme humility, of Sade and Nietzsche in their supreme blasphemy, of Rimbaud and Lautréamont consumed between the two. But think of what lies around you, the confoundingly unpredictable woman who obsesses you, the cruel and sadistic man who seduces you. Above all, become conscious of what sustains you by giving meaning to your life. Not as the leftover part shunned in favor of work, fame, money, goals, but that which amazes you in the world, that which, if it were to disappear altogether, would leave you no reason to stay on this earth in order to work, in order to survive, in order to work. Tragic seriousness. The truth means bleeding or coming. What do they call that? That's a haiku. It's 3 lines. Tragic seriousness is the title. The truth means, line 1, bleeding or coming. Okay, I think we're done with that. Hatred of Love has 2 chapters. His story and her story. I attempted to write, well, I didn't attempt, I was in the midst of the most painful breakup of my life. And I was trying to make sense of it by writing. And then after I wrote his story, which is mine, I mean, I didn't call it that time, I was writing my stuff. Later I realized, oh, that's his story. And then at the end, I tried to reverse it and say, oh, okay, well, what about her? Let me try to understand it from her point of view. Maybe it's not just about me and my pain. And in all of my books, I use painterly graphics, I use musical rhythm, I use theatrical scenes, but also I use 3 persons. First person, I, second person, you, third person, it, theory. But what's most missing from all writing is the second person. Who writes in the second person? I was trying to write in the second person. You only do that in letters. Tears of jubilation on the shores of the lake. Too many times have I walked this lake. But not being alone, I have not had the pleasure of going insane. Not being alone to the extent that so many friends can follow me so far in what I know. Even that the average man is not unaware of what I speak. And yet alone, still am alone. All right, we're going to go a little overboard. It's going to take a little more than 30 minutes, but that's okay. I got to finish the process. What we are, each in his own way, those whom I love, friends, lovers, each turns away. I search only for the ones whose eyes do not avert the sun, which I am. I am alone. Each one of us is alone. I will not flinch in the face of this abyss, but challenge it and make it dance. Looking into her eyes, the one who knows me, face to face, ferocity in their eyes. Interesting. From her to there. I was using the they pronouns 30 or 40 years ago. Differently, though, I just realized that's not how I was referring to it. I was referring to their eyes, meaning me and her together. That we together are seeing something, experiencing something. It's not hers or mine. It's something that we did together. Unfortunately, it destroyed us. It broke us apart. But maybe that's okay. Okay, I'll just read one more piece here. This one's called The Gift. Now perhaps finally I am I, she is she, and I can say, you there, be with me. But we are nothing, you and I, except burning words which could pass from me to you. More, even, silence, burning less. I retreat from the very gift that pours out of me towards her for fear that it will crush her. So open, so vulnerable is she to me. And yet it boils out of me, it releases itself from me. It demands to be let go, given up to her. It has a destination. It has no origin. It precedes me. It's already there, in her, with her. The gift of myself is not inside of myself. It is already for her, for the one I love. But this word is not enough. Yet I will use it anyway, with humility, with faith, with that faith that allows our paltry words and images not to stand in the way, with that faith that allows us to see behind these things that which there is there which precedes them, those forces, those energies, those effects. But no, I am slipping now, losing sight of her, and yet we all make mistakes. There it is again, faith, humility, and my love for her, which is so great, burning past desire, flowing warm, rich, surrounding, wild and yet restrained, to lay my head in her arms, to roll me through myriad histories. How can I hand her this openness, which is, quote, myself toward her, quote? How can I explain to her that there is nothing but a, quote, from me to you, end quote? So, Autopoesis Part 4. This one's called The Hatred of Love. I think that resonates with everybody. Does everybody understand what that means? The hatred of love? Not just the hatred you experience in love, not just the hatred of love, but the hatred of love, meaning when you love someone, there is hate. And if you can't accept that shadow and work through it, you will never have love or be able to express and continue with love. And in my practice, of whatever, my clinical practice, but also my everyday life with friends and lovers over the past 40 years, I have seen this disintegrate and disappear more and more. Nobody can have a relationship today because they're not even willing to go through a tiny bit of this. Okay, letters. One, Dear A, from my brother to my brother, and abstract feelings, painful love burn genius. Let me do a Kerouac thing here. The fellaheen and its excluded other, woman, desire, passion, evil, dredged up, dragged along, pulled through, pushed forth, through the abstract, they want banks. But, return to the repressed, we're still here. Touching the imprinted text on the page, hearing the voice that gave spirit to the word, I keep reading the first paragraph, alone containing every book ever written. A genius and passion which still shocks me. Where are you now? I hope you're writing with me. If only we could fight them and seduce them together. What was that one thing I did? What was that one thing you did? I lived. Dear B, the great remembering, family curse that conjures up visions before the viewer, but the details so vivid, like you've been hit in the stomach with a sledgehammer. Can't afford to be compassionate in the present like other folk because the remembering takes all the energy. What kind of compassion is that, they'd say? That's selfish. Maybe so, maybe so. What isn't? It's honest, at least. Don't hide behind duty. You follow your desire and I'll follow mine. Slips of the pen. This whole letter feels like a slip of the pen, for it's so unlike me that I wonder what part of me is speaking in these few movements, or just who is speaking through me. In any event, at least, it speaks, but of the middle, without beginning or end. I don't even know what address this will finally reach you at. Write a little more often and it's easier to take. I speak of inside, but I also want to know practical things. Don't leave me in the dark. We must suffer, dear C. We must suffer from the same horror at the debasement of a friend's intimacy through the distance of a letter. Yeah, when I was writing this, it's kind of weird because a lot of these were letters that were written on paper. It was before the internet and before cell phones. We had to write paper letters. We still did it back then. And in Europe, if you called on your landline, you got charged per minute. So nobody had conversations. They didn't have these long conversations. So it was just total isolation. There was no contact. So we wrote. Still, we hope for another chance. We assume that even in order to bear the sins and neglect that haunt us, but to begin is all. In the middle, that happens one day. Beginning and ending are what hurt. We face up to it. We sacrifice at every turn, at every choice, every minute. One day, we no longer turn away from life. We don't hide behind duty. We own up to desire and even more. That behind every act is desire. And along with every desire is the sacrifice of other desires. Ours are the others. Tell it like it is. It begins and it grows. The important thing is to say something. A little, a lot, but honestly, quickly, we keep it going. I'm listening.